Hello and welcome to this Ranger4 webcast. Today's webcast will look at the DevOps Maturity Scale. The webcast will be brought to you by Helen Bill, Head of DevOps here at Ranger4. If you have any questions, please enter them in the questions feature and we'll answer them at the end. For now, I'll pass you over to Helen.
Thanks, Tej, and hi everyone. As Tej said, my name is Helen Beale. I'm the Head of DevOps here at Ranger4. So first of all, what we often start with on presentations is a kind of a definition of DevOps, but today we're actually going to talk about something a little bit different. So let's talk about what's different about DevOps. We spend most of our working hours chatting to people about DevOps, and a lot of people say that DevOps is different for every environment, and a lot of people tell us think they've been doing DevOps for sort of 15 years or so. So what's different about DevOps now? Why is it such a buzzword? Why are people doing so many polls on where people are, and how can we talk about maturity when we talk about it if it is something that is so kind of vague and intangible as some people would have you believe? So when I start thinking about what's different about DevOps, where I normally start is thinking about what's different about the environment that we're in at the moment. And I've worked in IT for nearly 20 years now, since about 1995, when the internet was just starting to come through and email was just starting to come through, and we hadn't even heard terms like e-business and SOA and things like that. Now we're in a position where the internet is completely prevalent. It's everywhere. Digitization of business is absolutely key, and most businesses recognize that to keep up with their competition, to beat their competition, to survive and indeed thrive, the internet is a really important part of their strategy, and being able to give the consumers of their services or their products, whether they be individuals or whether they be businesses, access to the product catalogues or to the services over the internet through mobile phones, having an eye on social media is really, really critical. So that means that the business is putting lots and lots of pressure on the IT development people to innovate and put lots of change through the IT systems. Some people, one of our customers, Hiscox, talks about this a lot, Biz DevOps and Biz DevSecOps, and the fact that even though people think of development or DevOps as being about development and operations, actually the business is a really important part of it as well. So on one side of the coin, we have this environment where digitization is driving innovation and driving change through development. On the other side of the coin, we have the IT operations people who have these systems that have been evolving over decades. I mentioned SOA and things like that a moment ago. We have very heterogeneous environments in lots of our customer sites. We have, and we'll come on to different systems a bit later, but legacy systems and systems of record that are quite old, and then we have newer systems of innovation. We might have multiple flavors of Java application servers. Most customers have a mix of Java and .NET. So we have all these different things that people are trying to manage, particularly with web applications as well. What we see a lot of is a lot of services being called, and actually a lot of web applications calling services, not just within the organization to things like an existing mainframe that may have been there for quite some time, also to external services, things like payment services, credit check services, that sort of thing. So all of this adds up to a very, very sophisticated, complex, and ultimately quite fragile environment. So people want to make loads of change, but it's really hard for them because there's this inherent instability in the infrastructures that have evolved over the time that IT has been developing. So that's one thing that's different about DevOps. And the other thing that's kind of been happening during this time that these systems have evolved and become more complex is that people have been planning their organizations and running their organizations. And there's a very common way that people have built their IT organizational structure, and they've typically siloed the development teams and the operations teams, giving them different reporting lines up into the IT directors and the CIOs. And the development teams and the operations teams have been quite segregated and quite separate and haven't been communicating or collaborating particularly effectively on the route of a software development to the market, to the end user experience. So DevOps is really trying to break down those barriers and bring those teams close together. Now, because of the additional stresses on the IT people, because of the innovation and things that have been coming through, the conflict between those two organizations that I described as development operations has been manifesting itself in a number of ways. So the kind of things that we hear a lot from customers are, it takes operations too long to provide me an environment. development are asking for access to production-like systems. The first time we heard that a system was down was when a customer phoned us. So we hear lots of these stories. We hear about war rooms, and war room, I must admit, I just think is a really incredibly unhealthy term. So DevOps is a movement trying to change trying to remove this conflict and trying to make it more seamless and help these organisations get that innovation to market faster and help that be a higher quality to make end users happier. Now, the other piece of DevOps is around automation. So when we're trying to smooth that process, we can identify bottlenecks, and then quite often we can automate pieces of that process and make it faster. And I think this is another thing that makes DevOps different now to where we were several years ago. There's a number of new tools, and we talk particularly about application release automation, service virtualization, and business transactional level application monitoring as the kind of new tooling that really supports this DevOps mantra of being able to do things like software releases on demand, automate all the testing, do preemptive smart failure, all those kind of things. So that's a long-winded definition of DevOps. So let's have a think about the maturity scale. So this is our standard maturity scale that we use at Ranger4 when we start talking to organisations about where they are and where they want to be. Nobody's perfect. Lots of people have done lots of things and tried lots of things already, and in fact not all of our engagements are, in fact certainly not with greenfield sites that have never heard of DevOps before. We do a lot of work with people that have spent maybe even a year or two already trying out some DevOps initiatives, starting to build some continuous delivery pipelines, starting to do some stuff, and they need some kind of further acceleration up the maturity scale. Now, a few of you on the call are probably looking at this and wondering where you are on it, and some of you are probably thinking, well, we've done a bit of 3 and a bit of 2, and we're kind of maybe pushing a bit into 4, but we haven't done that bit. So what we've done here is we've tried to summarise sort of about 200 odd questions and attributes into a simplified slide. So what we do find is that, as I say, no organisation is perfect. Every organisation is unique. This is a good starting point to have a discussion about what's been tried so far and where people are trying to go with it. The ultimate goal for not everybody, but for most people around DevOps is continuous delivery. So this concept of having a pipeline where a requirement can get through to the end user with the least amount of resistance through the organisation and come out the other side being fully tested and fully functional, and being able to do that fast. So getting away from old waterfall type deliveries and really into agile, iterative, almost daily releases. And this takes a lot of pain away from the end users when they're not given a massive bundle of changes every 6 months. And you'll be familiar with this from your own smartphone usage, that applications that change minutely but often are a lot easier to work with than ones that change massively and infrequently. This is another maturity scale that we like to use, and we come across it a lot actually in our customers that have already found it and already been using it. It is kind of useful. It has a few drawbacks for me though. In particular, it doesn't talk about requirements management. I've been, as I said, working in IT for about 20 years, and about 15 of those I've been working specifically around the software development lifecycle and in particular around requirements. And I'm constantly surprised by how many organisations haven't yet nailed requirements, and we'll look at requirements in a bit more detail in a moment. But and in fact, the case study that I'm going to talk about later on is very requirements driven as well. So even though we kind of think requirements management is maybe a bit of an old discipline, and maybe people should have handled this now, which is maybe why it's not included on this maturity scale, it's still very much part of DevOps in my mind. And certainly when I talk to customers and we talked about things like how to involve operations earlier in the development cycle to make them feel more engaged, and operations are very welcoming and enthusiastic about doing that, because one of the things, for example, that we hear, another complaint we hear a lot, is that the non-functional requirements weren't built into the development and the application design earlier enough. So actually having requirements management on the maturity scale, I think, is important. And then the other bit is, I just think that some of the maturity bits could be a little bit more exact. So if we take, for example, the level 3 on release management and compliance, operations and delivery teams regularly collaborate to manage risks and reduce cycle time. Well, for me, it's like, really being able to have total maturity about release management is about being able to release on demand at any point. And it's about having systems in place to do that. It's about having the ability to instantly roll back to the last known good state. And it's about having a full and complete audit trail of every change that is made into that system. But still a useful maturity scale when we're talking to organisations and trying to figure out where they are. Now, one of the things we kind of have skipped over a little bit this time is around the definitions of DevOps, but I'm just going to mention for a moment, and we'll come back to this again, I'm sure, in a minute. But for any of you on the call that haven't heard the acronym from John Willis, CALMS or CAMS, as an acronym to describe what DevOps is all about. So he's really talking about culture, automation, metrics, and sharing. And when I said CALMS, there was an L in it as well, so that L's often for lean, and some people like to use that in there as well. But the point I really wanted to make was about the M in that and the metrics being really important. So what we're trying to do when we talk about maturity is we're starting to try and baseline a current state. So we're trying to say, right, this is where an organisation is, and we start taking metrics, and we'll come onto that in a bit more detail in a minute as well. We're starting to get a view of where an organisation is right now so that we can make a plan to move them forward, and then we can actually measure success and evolution along that plan and report against success and tweak things that maybe aren't working quite so well. So this is one of my preferred maturity matrices, and I do have quite a lot of discussion with our consultants quite regularly about the value of maturity matrices, and that's really about what I was saying earlier, that no organisation is exactly alike to another. Every organisation is unique. So trying to put people into boxes and trying to kind of compartmentalise different areas is quite hard to do because everyone is different. However, there is a lot of value, I think, in trying to figure out where you are on a scale like this and where you want to go. So this is our requirements one, and as I said earlier, I'm still constantly surprised by how many organisations feel that they haven't yet nailed requirements. They still don't have sort of even standard templates or standard ways of describing requirements. They're still perhaps using spreadsheets or Word documents and not using collaborative tools where people can really share and view and comment on the different requirements that are being gathered and track them as they get developed through the software. So here's another one. So I picked this one out of the Gartner CD maturity scale a moment ago. This is about application release automation and deployment automation. So this is a useful maturity scale to discuss with people. What we see at the start is people tended to do everything manually. I don't think many people are doing stuff manually now. I think most people have moved on to the script bit. So what kind of happens was, one of our talented IT staff was sitting there building yet another server and completely bored to death with the task, and realised that they could probably write a script to make that bit a bit quicker, and then they wrote another script and another script, and over time this increasingly huge pile of scripts that are pushing stuff through, which works, but when it breaks it's really painful, and there's often only one person, the person that wrote them, that understands those scripts, and there's no real way of really recording everything that's been done there. So the element of auditability and being able to prove to compliance officers that we understand what's being done in the system is quite weak with if it's all done by scripts. Automation tools, I've seen this happen in one of the banks that we work with. The auditors came in and asked to see what a certain web page on a certain application said a year and a half earlier, and they were able to go back into the automated deployment tool and find the deployment that was running that day and redeploy it and show the auditors there, and then exactly what that web page looked like on that day. So very, very powerful stuff. So I mentioned this concept of baselining where you currently are in order to move yourself forward, and I also mentioned sort of distilling 200 odd questions down into that 5-step maturity scale. So all of this learning has come out from the times that we've been delivering this here, which we're going to talk about now, which is our own DevOps Maturity Assessment, and I've put that it's award-winning in there because it did indeed quite recently win an award from IBM, a Beacon Award 2015 for Outstanding DevOps Solution. So we were very grateful for that recognition from one of our key partners. The maturity assessment itself was originally designed to help sort of greenfield people get started off, but as I said, we're helping more and more with transformations now as well. So the important bit is really the starting point that I've mentioned. So this baseline assessment, so using some of the maturity models that we've just looked at, using these kind of 200 odd questions that we have, many of which are actually around culture. So lots of people think that it's very difficult to quantify culture. We don't think it is, and we've worked out some ways of doing that and asking and interviewing people and having discussions around attributes, things like the way organisations are structured, the way that teams are composed, the way that people feel about their work, the way that they feel about their ability to generate ideas and how their ideas are acted upon. So this all kind of boils down to motivations, and when we talk about motivations we start talking about cultural environments where autonomy and mastery and purpose are key and nurtured and held up as the ideal way of doing things. So a lot of the metrics we gather here, and I should mention actually that this is generally, although we've done smaller and we've done larger depending on the organisational size, generally a 10-day consulting engagement. So the way that it works, we do a little bit of prep and then we come on site and we do a half-day workshop with the project kick-off workshop with the key stakeholders of the project in the morning, and then in the afternoon and for the full next day we conduct a series of interviews, normally one-to-one, sometimes a couple of people in one room with the consultants, and we normally do this two-handed, as it were, so we have two consultants there to give us normally one that's a bit more culturally oriented and one that's more technical, and they have a chat with the various people. So there's normally about 12 interviews over that day and a half after the kick-off work, and then they start moving into the report element. So what you can see on this chart is where we start. So we baseline the current state, so we do this assessment and we start taking these metrics. So I've mentioned the metrics that we do around culture and how we measure there. We also do a number of metrics around process maturity, so I've just shown you a couple of examples of some of the processes we look at. You would have noticed some more on the earlier maturity matrices from ourselves and also from Gartner. So in addition to requirements management and release management, we also look at things like build and configuration management, testing, application performance management, and security, a number of other areas to try and get a view on where people are. And then we finally do a maturity measurement and assessment around the current DevOps toolchain, whether that is just some standalone tools or whether there are some integrations through the SDLC. So in the stakeholder kickoff and actually in the interviews as well, we will have been having discussions about the future state. So again, it's something that the maturity matrices are very useful for helping us articulate where an organisation wants to be. And in addition to the metrics around things like volume of defects, time it takes to test defects, volume of releases, time it takes to perform a release, volume of outages, MTTRs, so the mean time to recovery. In addition to all of those sort of metrics, we often take very business-specific metrics. So an organisation, and you'll see this when we do the case study in a minute, an organisation may have some specific business metrics and goals that they're aiming for. So the consultants gather all this information, they go away and they digest it, and then they come up with a number of initiatives and imperatives based on what they've learned about the bottlenecks and the challenges that the organisation is having, and they fit assess them and prioritise them, and then present back. And the final piece of this piece of consulting is to present back the report and the roadmap for success, so some recommendations to move forward. So we'll have a look at a real one of these shortly. So this has kind of alluded to this a little while earlier and almost a moment ago as well. So when we're doing the fit assessment, one of the things that we try and understand is where it would be good to start a DevOps project or do the next DevOps project. And there's been some traditional thinking in the marketplace that DevOps is all around the systems of innovation, and this is another slide from Gartner. Actually, this is one of Ronnie Colville's from her 7 Steps to DevOps. One of the steps, I think it's 2 or 3, I can't remember which, is pick your application. However, more and more we are discovering that systems of record are just as, if not more, suitable for DevOps types of projects. And even though there's a tendency or a temptation often to pick like a quick win, I think Also, what we try and do as part of the DevOps Maturity Assessment is actually try and consider if there's bigger wins with more challenging projects and how to mitigate any risks in tackling them. So you get the roadmap. So let's have a look at a case study. So this is a case study for one of our customers, Platform Securities. Platform Securities are part of FIS. They basically provide a managed service trading platform for a number of large banks. So Platform Securities actually initially came to us and said, we think we need some testing automation. And we said, you're obviously getting a lot of defects. And they said, yes, loads. We just can't deal with the volume. It's really holding us back from doing the other things that we want to do with our business. And we said, okay, what we often see with people that have lots of defects coming through is there's often a problem a little bit earlier. There's like a root cause, and that's the effect. And the root cause is often that there's a problem around the way that requirements are being managed. So we had that chat with them, and we decided that actually it would be a really good idea to take a step back and start by doing this assessment before we did any automation. And any of you that are familiar with the Manage People Process tools, that will make sense to you. We talk about culture, interactions, and automation now. And what we're saying in both of those cases is that automation is really powerful and really useful, but it's no good if you haven't sorted out your people or your cultural aspects first, and if you haven't got your process or your interactions understood, documented, and streamlined. And only then can an automation or a tool give you full value. So Platform Securities agreed that that was a good idea, so we took a step back and kind of started from the start rather than just implement a testing tool. We said, let's have a look at everything here. So these were their key business drivers, and as I said earlier, DevOps isn't just about IT at all, it's very much about business. So I think it's really important that when we do any of these kind of projects is to really understand what the business is trying to achieve. So as you can see here, they had some pretty aggressive growth targets and a plan on how to do that. So keeping their existing customers happy and wanting to win new clients. They wanted to be able to offer new clients something special, which was going to mean changing the way that they got their innovation to their customers. They also have some compliance things to take care of and be aware of, and some process efficiencies that they wanted to try and achieve, and staff retention, which is something we talk more and more with our customers about. We're really lucky to have a number of customers who are happy to talk on our behalf at events and things, and one of them is Hiscox. And when I talk to Gareth, who's the CTO at Hiscox, about our appreciation of his willingness to support us at our events, he often explains that one of the reasons that he likes to do that is because they're always on the lookout for new people, new talented people to join their organisation. And it's hard, in particular, really hard right now to find good DevOps people. There's certainly a supply and demand issue. So we appreciate that talent attraction and retention is a challenge for many of the customers that we work with. So the high-level findings, so this is the report that we gave back to Platform Securities after we had completed all of the stakeholder kickoff and the interviews and had gone away and thought about it. And this is our report about what we found and what we recommended. So we found that they weren't optimally aligned, so there were some problems in the way that they were organisationally positioned between development operations. As we suspected, there was a problem around the requirements definition process, and it was not linked effectively to the testing process. So you'll remember earlier when we looked at the requirements management maturity matrix, you'll remember that at level 5, the most mature level, we were talking about tools that integrated requirements and testing. The manual testing was causing a problem, slowing them down. There was a problem over the way that they were recording configurations. The testing, the actual kind of method of testing they were doing didn't reflect what their clients were trying to do, and they had a problem getting their innovation out into their clients' hands. So this is an architectural diagram of where they were. So you can see requirements and testing won't be signed off against each other. It's very, very loose, the way that it was coupled. It's very difficult to monitor progress of any project. The requirements management, I mentioned this earlier, all MS Word based. The defect management was not really connected to the test management or the requirements management, so there's a lot of disconnect there. And again, there's this issue around scripts, around deployment. Now, I've mentioned a couple of times already these 200 odd questions that we have, what we use when we're trying to assess where people are and what their maturity is. We use those questions and we score them, and we have a Ranger4 DevOps Maturity Index. So what we can do is actually give somebody a single number. So you can end up with, you know, reams and reams of different maturity matrices and radar diagrams and showing people where they are. But actually, we find it helps just to distill that down to a single number in addition to doing the rest of it. But that gives us a way of saying this is where you compare to other organisations in your market or in your industry, and also another way of setting targets for improvement and reporting and rewarding against any improvement as people move their rating up the DMI. So here's the business metrics we collected at Platform Securities, so you can and where we decided to target. So you can see they had an 8-week test cycle, which they wanted to get down to 3, an 8-month release cycle that they wanted to reduce that. Unfortunately, they're kind of constrained by their some of their development practices there, but we had a plan. And reduced, they've got a very high number of defects, and at this point we hadn't really managed to identify exactly how many, and it's quite a hard thing to do in some respects, particularly when you've got multiple applications and you're going through different kind of release and testing cycles. So you might have 5 defects one day and 35 the next, and it's quite a variable, but you know, it's important to get these metrics and tie them down or pin them down as much as we can. They're having some problems with customer satisfaction, and some issues around the costs and the handovers. So our key recommendations, we recommended and enacted a organisational redesign. So that was basically removing the silos between Dev and Ops, and basically kind of reconfiguring people around product ownership teams. So instead of having a testing team and a requirements team or a business analyst team, actually having teams around product lines. We also did some agile coaching around that to help them really move away from the waterfall processes that were quite heavily entrenched, and enable them really to get iterative. So we recommended the implementation of a requirements management tool and a test automation tool, and started to try to fix some of the stuff around the way that they were configuring their software applications, and then setting up test labs and deployment management. So there's kind of a number of next steps. You can see there's a process change program at the start, and then that was really leading into 3 phases of process and sort of specific process and automation pieces. So there was a requirements piece, a testing, and a continuous delivery piece that we recommended. And this was the future that we defined for them. So you can see there's some tooling in there, there's some tight coupling going on between test and requirements, some deployment automation, and lots of different levels of testing going on and being automated. And the results of this implementation and this work that we did here were quite pleasing. So we reduced the overall testing time by 35% in the first 6 months, which represented, if we extrapolate that over the year, savings for 150k. And the volume of defects by more tightly coupling and managing requirements better was reduced by 28%. And overall, the client satisfaction was agreed to be improved. So that is our presentation and webcast today on the DevOps Maturity Scale. If you would like your own DevOps Maturity Assessment, no matter where you feel you are today on the maturity scale that we looked at, then please do get in touch. You will have our email addresses as a result of our sending you the details of today's webcast, and we will follow up with you. So we have recorded today's webcast, as Ted said, and we will send that out later. I'm just going to see now if we have any questions. I can't see any there in the question box, and none there on the chat. So I think unless Ted's just going to interrupt me with one, I think we're done for today. So thank you very much. As I say, get in touch if you need anything. Thanks. Bye bye.